I served 4 years as a radar operator at one of the most isolated stations in the North Warning System. What happened during the winter of 2019 isn't in any official report. The Air Force made sure of that. But I kept my own records, timestamps, frequency readings, personal observations, everything they told me to forget. My name is Airman First Class Tyler Cuspuk, half Yupik on my mother's side, which is how I ended up volunteering for the Alaska posting when everyone else was trying to get stationed somewhere warm. The elders in my family always said the land up north remembers things. After what I witnessed at Oliktok Point, I understand what they meant. The station sits on a frozen peninsula jutting into the Beaufort Sea, about 150 miles from the nearest town. During winter, the sun disappears for 67 days. We called it the dark season. 4-man crews rotated every 2 weeks, 2 radar operators, 1 maintenance tech, 1 station commander. The isolation was supposed to be the hardest part of the assignment. It wasn't. I'm breaking my security clearance by writing this. The documents I photocopied before my discharge could land me in federal prison. But 3 other operators from different stations have reached out to me privately. They saw it too. The frequency that shouldn't exist. The returns that painted objects moving through solid matter. The way our equipment started detecting things that were simultaneously there and not there. Technical Sergeant Raymond Tuvak was my shift supervisor that winter. 22 years in the Air Force, most of it spent at radar installations from Greenland to Guam. Nothing rattled Ray. He'd seen equipment failures, atmospheric anomalies, even Russian bombers testing our response times. But on December 3, 2019, at 0247 hours Alaska Standard Time, I watched Ray's hands shake as he stared at his scope. "Cuspuk," he said, not looking away from his screen. "Tell me what you're seeing on your display." I checked my monitor. At first, it looked like ground clutter, the kind of interference you get from ice crystals in the atmosphere. But ground clutter doesn't move in perfect mathematical spirals. It doesn't maintain consistent velocity while phasing through registered solid objects. And it definitely doesn't respond when you adjust your scanning frequency. "Sir, I'm seeing an object at bearing 270, range 43 miles, altitude..." I stopped. The altitude reading was impossible. According to my scope, the object was simultaneously at 5,000 feet and 500 feet below sea level. Ray picked up the secure phone to contact NORAD. His hand hovered over the handset for a full 30 seconds before he set it back down. "Log it as ice crystal interference," he said finally. "Atmospheric anomaly." That was the first lie we told. Over the next 9 weeks, there would be many more. Each one brought us closer to understanding what the Arctic had been hiding beneath its electromagnetic noise, and why the military had really built these stations in the first place. The Oliktok Point long-range radar station consisted of 3 structures connected by enclosed walkways: the operations building, the living quarters, and the generator facility. Everything painted white to blend with the landscape 9 months out of the year. From the air, we probably looked like 3 sugar cubes dropped on an endless sheet of paper. I arrived in mid-November, just as the last sunset of the year painted the horizon orange and purple. Senior Airman Marcus Iqaluit met me at the makeshift landing strip, his parka hood pulled tight against the wind. "Cuspuk?" He had to shout over the Twin Otter's engines. "Welcome to the edge of nowhere." The first thing you notice about these Arctic stations is the sound. The generators run constantly, a low throb that works its way into your bones. The wind never stops. It whistles through the radar arrays, creating harmonics that change with the temperature. After a few days, your brain starts filling the white noise with patterns that aren't there. Voices, music, sometimes crying. "That's normal," Iqaluit told me during my first shift. "Wait until the temperature drops below -40. The station starts singing." The crew I joined was small but experienced. Technical Sergeant Raymond Tuvak ran operations with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades perfecting his routine. He showed me around the operations center, a cramped room dominated by 4 radar displays and banks of communications equipment. "Primary system is the ANFPS 117, he explained, pointing to the largest scope. "Solid-state 3-dimensional L-band frequency, can track a baseball at 200 miles. He tapped a smaller display. "This is our short-range system, covers anything inside 50 miles. And this," he indicated a third screen showing weather data, helps us differentiate between actual contacts and atmospheric interference. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Apasingok handled maintenance. She'd grown up in Utqiagvik, the northernmost town in Alaska, and knew how to keep equipment running in conditions that would freeze hydraulic fluid solid. During my first week, I watched her repair a seized antenna motor using a blowtorch, WD-40, and what she called traditional Inupiaq engineering, which mostly involved hitting things at very specific angles. Equipment up here doesn't follow the technical manuals, she explained. The cold changes how materials behave. Metal becomes brittle. Plastic, our routine was rigid. 2 operators on duty at all times, 12-hour shifts, equipment checks every 4 hours. Weather balloons launched twice daily to calibrate for atmospheric conditions. We'd scan our assigned sectors, log contacts, and file reports. Cargo planes heading to Prudhoe Bay, commercial flights on the polar routes. Occasionally, a Russian Tu-95 Bear bomber testing how close it could get before we scrambled fighters from Elmendorf. The first unusual reading came on my 5th day. I was working the night shift with Tuvok. The temperature outside had dropped to -35, and ice fog had rolled in from the Beaufort Sea. On the scope, it looked like cotton candy, fuzzy returns that obscured everything beyond 20 miles. Good training conditions, Tuvok said. This is when you learn to read between the interference. He taught me to recognize patterns in the chaos, how ice crystals created specific signatures, how temperature inversions could bend radar waves, making objects appear where they weren't, how the aurora borealis, when it danced overhead, could paint false returns across our screens. At 2300 hours, I noticed something odd, a brief return at the extreme edge of our range, bearing 315 degrees. It appeared for exactly 3 sweeps of the radar, about 12 seconds, then vanished. Sergeant Tuvok, I had a contact at... I saw it. He was already pulling up the data log. Speed? I checked my notes. Approximately 900 knots. Altitude? That's unclear. The return showed multiple altitude readings simultaneously. Tuvok frowned at his screen. In the green glow of the display, his face looked carved from stone. Run a diagnostic on your receiver. I did. Everything came back normal. Could be a meteor, he said finally. We get them sometimes. Chunks of space debris burning up in the atmosphere. They can create unusual radar signatures. But meteors don't change direction, and according to the data log, this object had made a 70-degree turn in less than a second. Tuvok deleted the log entry. Ice crystal anomaly, he said. That's what we're filing. Over the next week, the anomalies increased. Always at night, always at the edge of our range. Objects that moved through impossible vectors. Returns that showed up on one scope but not another. Readings that suggested solid objects occupying the same space at the same time. Apasingok ran full diagnostics on the DEW line. Distant Early Warning was the predecessor to our current system, a chain of radar stations built during the Cold War to detect Soviet bombers coming over the pole. Most were decommissioned in the 80s, but the infrastructure remained. Concrete foundations buried under decades of permafrost, cable runs that went nowhere. Some stations had been built on top of even older sites, weather stations from World War II, research outposts from the International Geophysical Year. The land remembers, Apasingok said quietly. It was an old Inupiaq saying. My grandmother used to tell stories about places where the boundary grows thin, where things can cross over. Cross over from where? I asked. She shrugged. From wherever they were before. Tuvok shut down that line of discussion immediately. We're Air Force personnel, not ghost hunters. We track aircraft and maintain equipment. That's it. But I noticed he started keeping a personal log. Not an official one, a small notebook he'd write in after each anomaly. And he wasn't entering our contacts into the main system anymore. The official logs showed clear skies and routine operations. The real data was going somewhere else. On December 1st, the temperature plummeted to -52 degrees Fahrenheit. The fuel oil turned to slush. The backup generators failed. Apasingok worked 18 hours straight to keep our primary power online. And through it all, the anomalies continued. They're getting closer, Ikalowitz said, studying the latest returns. Whatever they are, they're moving toward the station. Tuvok stood at the window, watching the aurora borealis ripple across the sky in sheets of green and gold. No, he said quietly. They've always been here. We just started looking in the right frequency. That night, he showed me how to adjust our radar to detect frequencies outside normal parameters, frequencies that weren't supposed to return any data at all. The scope lit up like a Christmas tree. December 3rd, 2019, 02:47 hours, Alaska Standard Time. The modified frequency TUVAC had shown me was designated L-band 1.851 GHz, a dead zone in the electromagnetic spectrum where nothing should register. No commercial transmissions used it. No military systems operated there. According to the FCC database, it was reserved but unallocated, empty space between assigned frequencies. But our scope showed a blizzard of returns. What are we looking at? I kept my voice level, though my pulse hammered in my throat. TUVAC adjusted the gain control, filtering out some of the noise. The returns consolidated into distinct patterns, 7 objects moving in formation. They maintained perfect geometric spacing, an elongated hexagon with one object at the center. Their speed was constant, 1,247 knots. Their altitude read as both 15,000 feet and minus 3,000 feet simultaneously. System error, I offered. Has to be. Objects can't exist at negative altitude, unless they're not entirely in our dimensional space, TUVAC said quietly. He'd been reading physics journals in his off hours, I'd noticed. Books about quantum mechanics and theoretical dimensions. What if our radar is detecting something that only partially intersects with our reality? The formation was approaching from the northwest, following a bearing that would bring them directly over the station in approximately 6 minutes. Should we report this? I reached for the secure phone. Report what? That we've modified our equipment outside specifications to detect objects that violate the laws of physics? TUVAC shook his head. They'd ground us both and seal our files. The temperature in the operations center was always kept at exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit. But as I watched those returns approach, my breath began to fog. The metal frame of my chair grew cold enough to burn through my uniform pants. Check the environmental systems, TUVAC ordered. I pulled up the station diagnostics. Everything read normal. Heating systems operational. Internal temperature steady at 68 degrees. Yet frost was forming on the inside of the windows. At 02:51 hours, the lights flickered. Not a power surge. A passangog had the generators running perfectly. The fluorescent bulbs dimmed and brightened in a slow rhythm like breathing. The oscillation matched the sweep rate of our radar. Every time the beam completed a rotation, the lights pulsed. There was a low vibration that came up through the floor. Not mechanical, the generators produced a steady drone at 60 cycles per second. This was different, irregular. It rose and fell in patterns that felt almost linguistic. The metal supports in the walls began to resonate, creating overtones that shouldn't have been possible from simple vibration. Iqaluit burst into the operations center. What's happening to the communications array? Before we could answer, he saw our modified display. His face went pale. You're using the dead frequency. It wasn't a question. My God, how long have you been? The building shook. Not violently, but with a deep, penetrating tremor that seemed to pass through solid matter without disturbing it. My coffee mug slid 3 inches across the desk without spilling a drop. Visual contact. A passangog's voice crackled over the intercom from the maintenance building. Northwest sky. You need to see this. We crowded around the observation window. The aurora borealis was acting strange. Instead of its usual curtain-like flow, it was bunching and twisting into 7 distinct vortices. Each spiral of light corresponded to one of the objects on our scope, but there was nothing visible at the center of those spirals. Just distortion, like heat mirages rising from summer asphalt, except the temperature outside was minus 52 degrees. Atmospheric lensing, TUVAC said, but his voice lacked conviction. Refraction of the aurora caused by... He stopped. We all saw it at the same moment. Shadows on the snow. 7 distinct shadows moving across the frozen landscape, cast by objects that weren't there. The shadows had structure, angular, mechanical, but wrong in a way that made my eyes water trying to follow their edges. They seemed to fold in on themselves, showing more faces and angles than any 3-dimensional object should possess. The formation passed directly overhead at 02:53 hours. Every piece of electronic equipment in the station screamed at once. Not alarms. The actual components were producing sound. Capacitors whining. transformers humming notes that climbed and fell like a Gregorian chant. The radar scope displayed impossible data, returns from inside the Earth, from beyond the atmosphere, from coordinates that didn't exist in normal space. My notebook, the one where I'd been recording anomalies, began to bleed. Not blood, but something dark and viscous that smelled like We stood in silence for 30 seconds. Then Tuvok walked to his desk and picked up the official log. Ice crystal interference from 0247 to 0253 hours, he said, writing carefully. Atmospheric anomaly caused minor electromagnetic disturbance. No significant events. Ray, a Passangok said, we can't just... Yes, we can. He turned to face us. And we will. Because the alternative is explaining why we modified classified equipment to access restricted frequencies. Why we detected objects that shouldn't exist. Why we didn't immediately report it through proper channels. What about the physical evidence? I held up my destroyed notebook. What evidence? You spilled coffee on your personal journal. The frost is from a momentary HVAC malfunction that Sergeant Passangok already repaired. He looked at each of us in turn. Nothing happened here tonight that can't be explained by equipment issues and atmospheric conditions. Understood? Iqaluit was the first to nod, then a Passangok. I was the last. But Tuvok wasn't done. He pulled out a locked filing cabinet and removed 4 notebooks, identical to mine but older. Their pages were also stained with that copper-smelling substance, formed into different patterns. This isn't the first time, I said. No, it happens every 33 days, give or take a few hours. Always the same formation, always the same trajectory. He pulled out a map of Alaska marked with red dots. And we're not the only station seeing them. Each dot represented a radar installation. Tin City, Point Barrow, Cape Lisburne, Barter Island, all part of the North Warning System, all reporting unusual ice crystal interference at regular intervals. So what are they? Iqaluit asked. Tuvok returned the notebooks to the cabinet and locked it. Above our pay grade, but I'll tell you what I think. I think they've always been here, flying routes that predate human civilization, and I think someone in the Pentagon knows exactly what they are. He pointed to a date circled on his calendar, January 5th, 2020. That's when they'll return, and next time, we're going to be ready. But we weren't ready. Nothing could have prepared us for what happened when those 7 objects changed their pattern for the first time in recorded history. When they stopped flying over and started coming down, the supply flight wasn't scheduled to arrive until December 15th, which meant we had 12 days to prepare for the next manifestation. Tuvok had us maintaining normal operations during our official shifts, but our real work began after hours. A Passangok started by examining the physical effects from the December 3rd encounter. She collected samples of the substance that had bled from our notebooks, a metallic fluid that remained liquid at -50 degrees, but crystallized at room temperature. Under her microscope, the crystals showed a structure that violated basic chemistry. Carbon atoms arranged in 7-dimensional matrices, she said, showing me the images. Each molecule exists in multiple states simultaneously. It's like, imagine if water could be ice, liquid, and steam all at once, occupying the same space. That's not possible, I said. Neither is existing at 2 altitudes simultaneously, but your radar tracked exactly that. She sealed the sample in a lead-lined container. Whatever passed over us operates according to different physical laws. The question is whether those laws are bleeding into our reality, or if we're briefly entering theirs. Iqaluit had been digging through the station's archives, boxes of records dating back to when this site was part of the original dew line. Most were water damaged or partially destroyed, but he found fragments that made my skin crawl. Listen to this, he said, reading from a yellowed report. December 1957, Dew Line Station POW4. Sergeant Donald Tikovic reported anomalous returns at bearing 315 degrees, exhibiting non-Euclidean movement patterns. That's the exact same bearing as our contacts. There's more, he continued. January 1958, 7 unidentified objects detected on experimental frequency. Objects cast shadows but produced no visual confirmation. 3 personnel required psychiatric evaluation after claiming to hear mathematical equations in the static. Tuvok had been corresponding with contacts at other stations through encrypted personal emails, nothing official that would trigger oversight. The responses painted a disturbing picture. Cape Lisburn reported equipment that spontaneously retuned itself to the dead frequency. Point Barrow had a radar operator who could predict the appearances down to the minute, claiming he heard countdown timers in his dreams. Tin City had lost 2 technicians who simply walked out onto the ice during a manifestation and were found 3 days later, alive but catatonic. "There is," Tuvok said. He produced a folder marked with classification stamps that had been blacked out. This came through in 1993, directed from NORAD Command. Any anomalous contacts matching specific parameters are to be logged as atmospheric interference. No exceptions, no investigations, no discussions. The parameters matched our 7 objects perfectly. Someone had known about them for at least 26 years, probably longer. On December 10th, things escalated. I was alone on the night shift, monitoring standard frequencies while secretly keeping one receiver tuned to the dead zone. At 011:17 hours, text appeared on my radar screen. Not an error message or system alert. Words, forming one letter at a time as the radar beam swept around. Carrier wave acknowledged. Geometric resonance established. Translation matrix initializing. I reached for the radio to call Tuvok, but the handset was dead. All communications were down. Satellite uplink, local intercom, even the emergency backup radio. But the text kept coming. "Your pattern recognition is improving. The intersection approaches. Prepare for dimensional collapse at coordinates." A string of numbers appeared. Latitude and longitude that placed a location exactly 3.7 miles northwest of our station. The same direction the objects always approached from. I grabbed the emergency flare gun and fired it from the observation deck, our agreed-upon signal for an urgent meeting. Within minutes, the entire crew had assembled in the operations center. "It's communicating." I showed them the screenshots I'd managed to capture. "Through our radar system, it's using the sweep pattern to generate text. Could be interference from another transmission," a Passangok suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. "Maybe someone's hacking our systems." "From where?" "We're 150 miles from the nearest potential signal source, and our systems are hardened against electromagnetic intrusion." Tuvok studied the coordinates. "This location, it's the old research site." He pulled out a topographical map. In the 1960s, the Army Corps of Engineers had built something at those coordinates. The records were mostly classified, but fragments suggested it was part of Project Iceworm, a secret program to build nuclear missile sites under the Arctic ice. Officially, the project was abandoned due to ice sheet instability. Unofficially, the engineers had reported geometric "This is insane," Iqaluit protested. "We're talking about deliberately seeking out something that violates the laws of physics." "It's already seeking us out," I countered. "Every 33 days, getting closer." The last pass was directly overhead. "What happens when they decide to stop?" Tuvok was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to his locked cabinet and pulled out something I hadn't seen before. A dosimeter that had been modified with additional sensors. "This detects dimensional membrane fluctuations," he said. "I built it based on theoretical papers about parallel universe intersection points. If we're going to do this, we need data." We suited up in extreme cold weather gear, multiple layers, heated gloves, emergency beacons. The Snowcat was a tracked vehicle designed for Arctic conditions. But even inside its heated cabin, the cold was a living thing that searched for any gap in our protection. The journey took an hour through the permanent darkness. Our headlights illuminated a landscape that looked alien. Pressure ridges where ice had buckled into small mountains. Snow carved by wind into geometric shapes that seemed too perfect to be natural. The aurora overhead was quiet, just a faint green glow. The coordinates led us to what looked like a natural depression in the ice. But as we approached, our lights revealed structure. Concrete pillars emerging from the permafrost, arranged in a perfect heptagon, 7 sides, each one exactly 33 meters long. "This isn't in any of the official surveys," Tuvok said, checking his maps. At the center of the formation was a metal hatch, half buried in ice. The metal was strange, not rusted despite decades of exposure, covered in the same 7-dimensional crystalline patterns we'd seen in the notebook residue. A Passangok's Geiger counter clicked sporadically. "Low-level radiation. but it's not following normal decay patterns. It's pulsing in prime number sequences. I knelt beside the hatch. There was text etched into the metal, but not in English or Russian. The symbols seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them, rearranging themselves into new configurations. "Look at this," Iqaluit called out. He was standing at one of the concrete pillars, his flashlight illuminating carved equations. "These are field equations for multidimensional space, but they're solved for 7 dimensions, not the 4 we exist in." Tuvak's modified dosimeter began screaming. Dimension shadows without sources. 7 figures that stood between the concrete pillars, each one impossibly tall, their forms constantly shifting like living geometric proofs. They didn't move toward us, they simply existed closer with each heartbeat, collapsing the space between us without crossing it. The radio and the snowcat exploded into static that formed words. Intersection point confirmed. Translation begins in 33 rotations. We ran. The snowcat's engine screamed as a passingok pushed it beyond its limits. Behind us, the aurora twisted into configurations that hurt to perceive. The 7 shadows remained at the installation, but somehow also followed us, existing in multiple locations simultaneously. When we finally reached the station, all our electronics were displaying the same message: prepare for confluence. Tuvak immediately began encrypting all our data and uploading it to a private server. If something happens to us, someone needs to know what we found. But I was focused on a different problem. The next appearance was scheduled for January 5th. According to the message, that would be the confluence, whatever that meant. We had 26 days to figure out how to survive it. January 5th, 2020, 0200 hours, Alaska Standard Time. We transformed the operations center into something that resembled a physics laboratory more than a military installation. A passingok had built electromagnetic field detectors from spare parts. Iqaluit had covered the walls with printouts of the equations we'd found at the heptagonal site, trying to decode their meaning. Tuvak had every recording device we could find running simultaneously. Infrared cameras, spectrum analyzers, even an old analog tape recorder he'd found in storage. Analog might survive what digital can't, he explained. Different recording medium, different vulnerabilities. I monitored 6 different radar frequencies simultaneously, including the dead zone at 1.851 GHz. For the past 3 days, that frequency had been showing increasing activity. Not objects, but distortions in the background noise that formed mathematical patterns. Fibonacci sequences, prime number spirals, constants like pi and e emerging from random electromagnetic static. At 0215, the building's metal frame began to resonate. Not vibrating, resonating, like a tuning fork finding its frequency. The sound was below normal hearing range, but we felt it in our bones, our teeth, our eyes. "They're early," a passingok said, checking her instruments. "Dimensional membrane thickness is decreasing. We're down to... Jesus, we're at 12% of normal." "What happens at 0? Iqaluit asked. "Theoretical physics suggests our reality and theirs occupy the same space. No barrier. Complete intersection. The lights didn't flicker this time. They bent. The fluorescent tubes remained straight, but the light they produced curved through the air in helical patterns. Our shadows split into 7 versions of themselves, each one moving independently. On my radar screen, the 7 objects appeared at their usual position, bearing 315, range 200 miles. But this time, duplicate returns showed them at 100 miles, then 50, then 20. Not moving toward us, existing at all distances simultaneously. "Look outside," Tuvak said quietly. The aurora borealis had transformed into something I have no words for. Instead of curtains of light, geometric solids made of luminescence rotated through the sky. Heptagons within heptagons, each face showing depths that extended beyond the night. Through those depths, we glimpsed structures, cities maybe, or machines. "Harvest?" Iqaluit's voice cracked. Before anyone could respond, the far wall of the operations center became transparent. Not broken or removed, transparent, like glass, except we could see through it in more than 3 dimensions. The room beyond wasn't the hallway that should have been there. It was a vast space filled with machinery that folded in on itself, each component existing in 7 dimensions while we could only perceive 3. They came through the transparent wall, not the shadows we'd seen before. the actual entities. My mind couldn't process their true forms. The visual cortex isn't designed for seven-dimensional objects. What I saw kept changing, sometimes crystalline lattices of dark metal, sometimes organic geometries that breathed with mathematical precision, sometimes nothing but equations given substance. One of them approached me, extended something that wasn't quite an appendage toward my forehead. The moment it made contact, I understood. They weren't invaders, they were surveyors, catalogers. Their civilization existed in 7 spatial dimensions, and every 33 years, our dimensional membrane weakened enough at certain points for them to observe us. Like scientists studying bacteria through a microscope, if the bacteria existed in a completely different realm of physics. The heptagonal sites weren't built by humans. They were intersection markers, placed there millions of years before our species evolved. The military had built radar stations on them by coincidence, or maybe guided by some subconscious recognition of their significance. Images flooded my mind, Earth from their perspective, a thin slice of existence, barely real, flickering in and out of their awareness. Humanity, electromagnetic patterns that occasionally achieved enough complexity to be interesting. Our technology, crude attempts to manipulate forces we couldn't truly perceive. But something had changed. Our modifications to the radar, broadcasting on the dead frequency, we'd created a resonance, made ourselves visible to them in a way we'd never been before, like bacteria suddenly flashing in coherent patterns, displaying intelligence. They were here to determine if we were worth preserving when the dimensional confluence completed. Preserving from what? I managed to ask, though my mouth didn't move. The communication was direct, consciousness to consciousness. The entity showed me. In 2,847 years, our dimensional membrane would collapse entirely. 3-dimensional space would fold into 7 dimensions. They were offering us a choice. They could mark us, alter our consciousness to survive the transition, but the process would change us fundamentally. We'd no longer be entirely human. We'd exist partially in their dimension, able to perceive realities beyond our current understanding, but forever separated from those who remained unmarked. The entity withdrew, and I collapsed. Around me, the others were having similar experiences. A Passangok was weeping, her hands covered in the same crystalline frost that had formed on the notebooks. Iqaluit was speaking in the symbol language, his voice producing harmonics human vocal cords shouldn't generate. Tuvok stood perfectly still, his eyes reflecting depths that weren't there. The entities moved through our station, examining everything. One of them interfaced with our radar system, and suddenly all our screens showed Earth from their perspective, a cross-section of existence, with visible layers showing every moment of time simultaneously. Past, present, and future coexisting in a single image. They showed us the other stations. Cape Lisburn, where the entire crew had already been marked. Point Barrow, where the personnel had refused and been left unchanged. Tin City, where something had gone wrong. The marking process had only partially worked, leaving the operators trapped between dimensions, conscious but unable to fully exist in either reality. "We need to decide," Tuvok said. His voice had acquired additional harmonics, like he was speaking from multiple locations at once. "They won't force us, but this opportunity won't come again for 33 years. How do we know they're telling the truth?" Iqaluit asked. "This could be invasion, assimilation, extinction disguised as evolution." One of the entities turned to him. Without warning, it reached into space and pulled out a piece of our future. A visual echo of Iqaluit 33 years from now, aged and alone, watching the radar as the next confluence approached, regretting his choice to remain unchanged. "That's manipulation," Iqaluit said, but his voice wavered. A Passangok was the first to decide. She stepped forward, extending her hand to the nearest entity. "My grandmother always said the land remembers. Maybe it's time we remember too." The marking process was neither painful nor pleasant. It was transformation at the cellular level, each atom in our bodies being tuned to resonate across 7 dimensions. I watched my hand become transparent, then solid, then something between. The entities accepted his decision without judgment. As dawn approached, though the sun wouldn't rise for another month, they began to withdraw. The transparent wall became opaque. The geometric aurora faded to normal. The temperature returned to its standard -50 degrees. But we who had been marked were forever changed. I could still function in three-dimensional space, but I was aware of the other 4 dimensions surrounding us. I could see the probability clouds of future events, the quantum superposition of all possible states, the mathematical substrate that reality is built upon. Tuvok uploaded everything to his secure server, then destroyed the modified radar equipment. Official report. Severe aurora event caused electromagnetic interference and hallucinations in station personnel, requesting immediate medical evacuation for psychological evaluation. Within 6 hours, helicopters arrived from Elmendorf. We were separated, debriefed, and ultimately given medical discharges for stress-induced psychiatric events. The official records show nothing unusual happened at Olektok Point that winter, but I know there are others like us now, marked, changed, waiting for the dimensional collapse we can see approaching like a slow wave across the centuries. We find each other sometimes, in quantum probability. We prepare, as best we can, for what's coming. And sometimes, late at night, I tune a radio to 1.851 gigahertz and listen to the messages from 7 dimensions away. They're still watching, still cataloging, still offering the choice to those who know how to find them. The confluence was just the beginning. The debrief at Elmendorf Air Force Base lasted 72 hours. They separated us immediately upon arrival. Different buildings, different interrogators, no contact allowed. The medical team that examined me included specialists I later learned were from DARPA, the CDC, and something called the Anomalous Materials Group, a department that officially doesn't exist. Colonel Harrison Kitka conducted my primary interview. Half Tlingit, half Irish, with eyes that suggested he'd seen other incidents like ours. He never accused me of lying, never suggested I was delusional. He just took notes in a leather journal while a digital recorder captured everything I said. Describe again the moment of contact, he'd say. Focus on physical sensations. What did your body experience? I told him about the cellular transformation, the awareness of additional dimensions, the ability to perceive probability clouds. He nodded like this confirmed something he already knew. Behind him, a medical monitor showed my brain scans, neural activity in regions that should have been dormant, patterns that formed geometric shapes no human brain should produce. Your blood work shows chromosomal alterations, he said on day 2. Specifically, additions to what we call junk DNA. Segments that were dormant are now active. The proteins you're producing, they fold in ways that shouldn't be chemically stable, yet they are. What does that mean for my future? Honestly, we don't know. You're not the first Airman Kuspuk, but you're the first we've been able to study while the changes are still fresh. He showed me a file, partially redacted. Operation Prism Break, 1973. 12 Air Force personnel at a radar station in Greenland reported similar contact. 7 accepted the marking. Within 5 years, all 7 had disappeared. Not dead, not AWOL, just gone. Ceased to exist in any trackable way. We think they translated, Colonel Kitka explained, shifted fully into the other dimensions, lost their anchor to 3-dimensional space. That's going to happen to us? Maybe. Or maybe you're different. The entities seem to be refining their process. Each confluence, the marked individuals last longer in our reality before translating. They gave me a medical discharge with full benefits and a monthly disability payment that was surprisingly generous. The paperwork listed my condition as chronic neurological disorder following extreme electromagnetic They're tracking us, he said. Not the entities, the military. There's a program, has been since the 50s. They monitor everyone who's been marked. He handed me a business card, Pine Valley Wellness Center. It's a support group for people like us, people who can see beyond the 3. A passing gawk had already translated partially. I visited her in the Anchorage clinic where they were keeping her under observation. Her body flickered between states, sometimes solid, sometimes transparent, occasionally existing in multiple positions simultaneously. She could still speak, but her voice came from 7 different points in the room. It's not frightening, she told me. I can see so much more now. The connections between all things, the patterns that guide existence. Did you know that every choice creates a new dimensional branch? I can see them all, spreading out like frost on a window. She lasted another 6 weeks before translating completely. The official report listed her as deceased from complications related to electromagnetic exposure. Her family received a flag and a pension. They never received a body because there wasn't one, just a space where she used to be, now occasionally flickering with light that suggested she still existed somewhere beyond our perception. The Iqaluit, who had refused the marking, was assigned to a base in Florida, as far from the Arctic as they could send him. He emailed me once, 6 months later. I dream about them every night. The entities, they show me what I gave up, the expansion of consciousness, the ability to perceive truth beyond our limited reality. But they also show me what I kept, my humanity, unchanged and finite. I don't know which choice was right. I don't think there was a right choice. He died in a car accident 3 years later. The official report called it driver error, but I've seen the probability streams. In 7 out of 9 probable futures, he drove off that bridge deliberately. The weight of refusing transcendence was too heavy to bear. I moved to Fairbanks and got a job teaching physics at the university. My ability to perceive higher dimensions made certain calculations trivial. I could see the solutions to equations that should have taken supercomputers to solve. My students thought I was brilliant. I knew I was just cheating, reading answers from dimensions they couldn't perceive. The Pine Valley Wellness Center met every Tuesday in the basement of a community center. There were 12 of us at first, all marked at different focus on physical sensations, Sandra would say. She'd been marked for 33 years, the longest of any of us. The cold of ice cream, the warmth of coffee, pain, pleasure, anything that reminds your body it exists in 3 dimensions. But we kept losing people, not to death, to translation. One day they'd be there, the next they'd exist only as impressions, shadows of possibility. We'd see them sometimes, flickering at the edges of perception, trying to communicate from 7 dimensions away. Their messages were always the same. It's beautiful here. You can see everything. Time doesn't flow. It exists all at once. Join us. In 2023, I was contacted by someone claiming to be from the Anomalous Materials Group. They wanted to hire me as a consultant. The pay was exceptional, the work was classified, and it involved analyzing data from radar stations detecting unusual frequencies. They were actively searching for the next confluence site. We've identified the pattern, my handler, Dr. Elizabeth Sikonik, explained. Every 33 years, the dimensional membrane weakens at specific coordinates. We can predict where. We want to be ready. Ready for what? To make contact on our terms, to negotiate, to understand their technology, maybe even to prevent the dimensional collapse they predicted. I laughed. You can't negotiate with beings that exist in 7 dimensions. It would be like an ant trying to negotiate with us. Then we need to evolve, she said simply. Become something more than ants. They were planning to deliberately mark volunteers, military personnel who'd scored high on specific psychological and physiological tests, people who might be able to maintain their anchor to 3-dimensional space while gaining the ability to perceive and interact with higher dimensions. We need guides, Dr. Sikonik said, people who've been through the process, who can help the volunteers navigate the transformation. I agreed to help, not because I believed in their mission, but because I could see the probability streams. In every future where humanity survived the dimensional collapse, we had help. Guides who'd been marked, teachers who could show others how to exist in 7 dimensions without losing themselves. As I write this in January 2025, the next confluence is 8 years away. The military is preparing. Volunteers are training. Equipment is being modified to operate across dimensional boundaries. But I know something. The entities aren't invaders or saviors. They're gardeners, and we're being cultivated for something beyond our current comprehension. The marking wasn't just preparation for dimensional collapse. It was selection, choosing which branches of consciousness would be preserved in the garden they're growing across 7 dimensions. I still teach physics. I still attend the support group. I still report for my monthly medical examinations. But I also spend my nights listening to 1.851 gigahertz, hearing the messages from beyond, learning what we're becoming. The confluence wasn't an ending, it was germination. And in 2,847 years, when 3-dimensional space folds into 7 dimensions, humanity will either bloom into something magnificent or wither into nothing. Those of us who've been marked are the seeds of whichever future we become. The Arctic doesn't forgive, and it doesn't forget. I returned to Oluktok Point last summer, 5 years after the confluence. The station is automated now, no permanent crew, just machines scanning the electromagnetic spectrum with no one to witness what they detect. The official reason is budget cuts and advancing technology. The real reason lives in classified files that will never see public release. Standing on that frozen shore, I could still see the dimensional scars, places where reality had been stretched thin, where the membrane between our world and theirs remains fragile. To anyone without the marking, it would look like heat shimmer rising from ice. To me, it looks like doorways waiting to open. The Yupik elders were right. The land does remember. It remembers when beings from 7 dimensions touched our reality. It remembers the choice we were offered. It remembers those who accepted transformation and those who chose to remain unchangingly human. Both decisions required a courage I'm only beginning to understand. Marcus Iqaluit made his choice to stay human, and it killed him. Not immediately, but inevitably. The weight of seeing transcendence and refusing it crushed him slowly, like atmospheric pressure at ocean depths. Yet in his refusal, there was a defiance that might be the most human thing of all. The willingness to remain finite, mortal, and limited, rather than surrender what we are for what we could become. Jennifer Apasangok chose transformation and translated into something beyond our understanding. Her consciousness expanded across dimensions we can't perceive, gaining knowledge that 3-dimensional language can't express. Was she still Jennifer in any meaningful sense? Or had she become something so far beyond human that her original self was just a memory, a larval stage of a transformation none of us can fully comprehend? Technical Sergeant Raymond Tuvak exists between those extremes, as I do. Marked but anchored, transformed but still recognizably human. We carry the weight of seeing reality's true structure while maintaining the illusion necessary for daily existence. We teach, we work, we love, we grieve, all while knowing these experiences are shadows cast by 7-dimensional objects we can barely perceive. The military continues its preparations. Each confluence brings new volunteers, new markings, new translations. They're building a cadre of dimensionally aware operators, though for what ultimate purpose remains hidden in classification stamps and need-to-know restrict. But here's what haunts me. The entities showed us a specific date, 2,847 years until dimensional collapse. That precision suggests not prediction, but planning. Someone, something, has scheduled our reality's expiration date. The confluence events aren't random weakening of dimensional barriers. They're scheduled maintenance, checking on an experiment that spans geological time. We were told we're being preserved, selected, cultivated. But preservation implies value, and value implies purpose. What are we being preserved for? What garden are we growing in? What harvest awaits at the end of those 2,847 years? I've met others who've been marked at different confluence sites around the globe. A radar operator from Russia who encountered them in Siberia. A submarine sonar technician who detected them beneath the Pacific. A radio astronomer who found their signals coming from between the stars. The phenomenon isn't limited to the Arctic or to military installations. It's planetary, possibly galactic. We're all being evaluated by criteria we don't understand, for purposes we can't imagine. Yet we continue our lives. We file our reports, maintain our equipment, and stand our watches. We keep secrets that would fundamentally alter humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. We carry knowledge that makes us question whether consensus reality is a necessity or a prison, and we wait for the next confluence, the next thinning of the veil, the next opportunity for humanity to choose its evolutionary path. The marked see reality as it truly is, infinite, layered, and largely incomprehensible to minds evolved for 3 dimensions. The unmarked see reality as it needs to be, solid, predictable, and survivable. Both visions are true, both are necessary, and both are running out of time. The next confluence approaches, the garden grows, and somewhere in 7 dimensions, our gardeners tend their crop, waiting to see what strange fruit we will bear when our dimensional winter finally ends.